an unidentified flying object.
Researcher on a mission with Dr. J.N. Elias.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Welcome back to another episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I am your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels, Los Angeles. As always, we have a fantastic show for you today, but today is extra special because it is another superstar guest that was here because you guys demanded that I bring him back. And fortunately, we were able to lock in a date during his busy tours. If you've been paying attention to the website or the Twitter feed, then you know exactly who I'm talking about. If you haven't, then ponder who it is until I read you the news for the day. Let's go to the first one. And this, of course, comes from my UK contact, Phil. Ryanair flight abandons landing after UFO spotted in sky over Liverpool John Lennon Airport. That's pretty cool. I didn't know John Lennon had an airport named after him, but nonetheless, that's a serious thing. Anytime you have unidentified flying objects and airplanes, especially airlines, that's a very, very big deal. Here's another one. This is actually the guy's name. Joshua Ross films UFO moving side to side over the Sunshine Coast. That comes from the Daily Mail, and that was actually sent by a listener named Robert. That's all I can say. And the video is actually available if anyone wants to see it. Here is a third UFO thing. Then we got some other exciting news to talk about. UFO shaped like a manta ray spotted over Costa Rica, and that comes from the Chron.com. Chron as in chronicle, just shortened, CHRON.com. Very exciting article. Now, this next two are, like I said, about NASA. Some of them I'm going to be reading excerpts of the quotes so you guys understand the actual headline. NASA struggles over deep space plutonium power. Okay, this is the quote part. PU, or for plutonium, PU-238, steady supply of heat makes it an ideal power source for long-haul interplanetary voyages where conditions may be too dim and cold for solar power and chemical batteries. Essentially, what they were trying to get at further in the article is that they're running out, and the Department of Energy's efforts to make more are proceeding at too sluggish of a rate for comfort for NASA. So I guess that's the issue. The final piece of NASA news, which I love to hear about, is the bright spots on the dwarf planet Ceres gleam with mystery. And that's, of course, NASA says that. That's their little quote, gleam with mystery. If you recall a while back, one of the news reports we did, what they were going to do is change the way they were looking for at SETI, changed the way they were looking for planets with life. Rather than using audio and radio telescopes or radios, they were essentially going to start looking for artificial light. Because obviously, if you see a planet that has a glimpse or areas of artificial light, what does that tell you? It's just like us going into in space and looking at Earth, and you could see the countries and cities that are lit up, which is why they say when you look at a space shot of North Korea, it is literally one of the darkest countries in the world, physically and literally. So I thought that was really interesting. Well, with that being said, I am ready to bring back our guest. Like I said, he is a superstar among everybody. His theories and his work and his inventions are really on groundbreaking and can take us to the next step in human evolution of what we need to proceed. There's so much about this man, and he is, of course, a physicist. And without further ado, let's bring him on. His name is Nassim Haramein. Mr. Haramein, welcome back.
Thank you. It's great to be on your show again.
Last time we had an amazing blast, and I know this time we'll have an amazing blast. And by the way, if anyone wants to ask questions during the second hour, if you ask your question, just hang up after that and listen to it on air after, because there is a slight delay, so you won't miss any of it. Nassim, let me ask you this. I know when you first started studying physics, of course, the mainstream scientific community was not really paying attention to your work. And obviously that must have been really frustrating because they're like, oh, this guy doesn't have a doctorate and he's talking about physics and advanced equations, but yet they just dismissed you. What was it that finally was the breakthrough that got them to finally pay attention to what you're doing and realize that this is serious and real?
Well, many of the predictions I made came through. I remember in the earlier times when I was talking about galactic centers as very large black holes or supermassive black holes. Many physicists, for instance, in the physics community and in physics conferences, didn't even believe black holes existed at all. At the time, there was a lot of debate about the even existence of black holes. The idea that they would be found in the middle of galaxies, at the center of galaxies, was in many cases considered preposterous, and so never mind, that I was telling them that they were most likely at the center of every galaxy in the universe. So it was very hard for them to accept, and I held fast to that view, and eventually, it was slowly but surely discovered that the center of all galaxies we observe seems to have black holes or supermassive black holes at their centers. So, these type of prediction power of the theory and many others. I've made many predictions that have come true, including sunspots on the sun being vortices going deep into the structure of the sun, where before they were believed that they were just surface events, and the fact that they absorb material, we see material falling into it. All these things are things I predicted from my theory, and of course now lately the correct radius of the nucleus of atom, which is kind of critical to all of the physics that deals with reality, is to, because all of reality basically is made of protons, the nuclei of atoms, and and this prediction is extremely precise. And the standard model is off by 4%. And although 4% might not seem like much, it creates a lot of issues with the standard models. So it actually is starting to take root and make some heads turns. But in no means is the battle won at all. There's still a lot of censorship. There's still a lot of segregation of the work I do, and actually there's really sad things that are happening to students and professors that are trying to endorse the work I'm doing inside the institutions.
What would you say is the greatest thing that you've received from someone else, from an outside authority, like a scientific journal or a school? What was the thing that made you feel the proudest of what you've achieved?
Many things, including, I would say, personal interaction with many advanced physicists in the world that not necessarily public, just because of the repercussion of endorsing my work, but that personally, congratulate me and think that my work has some value. But the prize I receive as a best paper award in my category in a physics conference or a multidisciplinary conference in Belgium was really exciting. Although it became the source of many tomato throwing moments, as well. Some of the invites I got in talking in certain physics department around the world. I was invited to talk at CERN shortly after publishing that prediction based on this holographic model of the radius of the proton. I was invited to give a talk at CERN and to describe my work because it really changes the way you think about physics, ourself, and the universe. And it's really critical. And some physicists there, some scientists there, thought that it would be important that the CERN community be aware of it. It was really exciting to be invited, and it was really disappointing to be disinvited when the director kind of freaked out.
Yeah.
So, it's still out there. It's still very difficult, and it's gonna take some more time. But slowly, but surely, I think people are coming around to realizing that there is a classical solution to quantum field theory, and quantum physics, that predicts gravity at the quantum level, and that makes very startling, very incredible discoveries of how things work at that level and how they relate to bigger things that we see every day.
That is definitely a topic I'm going to come back to, gravity. But I want to ask you, the paper that you wrote, is it Quantum Gravity and the Holographic Mass? Is that the one you're referring to?
Yeah, this is my latest paper. This is the one that made the prediction of radius the proton, and that actually, kind of nails as well the strong force and shows that it's actually quantum gravity acting at the subatomic level. And and the paper that the predecessor to that paper, the paper that preceded, was the Schwarzschild proton paper that got so much flack because it was incomplete. I was just on my way to formulating the whole thing, and I just had figured out a piece, so I published that. And this latest paper completes the picture, and so many of the criticism I get is still based on that earlier paper, and the people are not aware of the latest paper, which makes extremely precise predictions and gives very, very exciting results.
Exactly. And this is why I'm so happy for you, because of what you've contributed to the mainstream society and that they're finally starting to accept you. As you mentioned, you still have those, I don't want to say the word haters, but those who are narrow-minded and don't want to change their beliefs because they think that we have all the answers of physics, and therefore things that would violate our understanding is therefore impossible, non-existent. But that's not necessarily the case, because if our understanding of physics and everything in society going back thousands of years has changed. As quickly as you write a book on some topic, the next edition already has changes made to it. So I think it's just a matter of time before these people come around and start accepting it. Now, let me ask you about what you talked about, which is the biggest thing that I think is the most important and relevant: gravity. If we have the ability to alter gravity, then, as Bob Lazar stated, that would be the final piece of the pie that is needed for human evolution. He said that things such as creating wormholes, bending time and space, to even a force field, to possibly even time travel, would all be available to us if we had something, a device that can alter gravity. And is that where you're heading?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's like being very, very advanced. You see, what happens is that in order, just like with the electromagnetic field, as we discovered more and more of the spectra of the electromagnetic field, like infrared, X-ray, gamma ray, all this stuff, like microwave and all this, we started to be able to find various application to using these different frequency of the electromagnetic field, from X-ray machines for health purposes, to being able to heat up food with infrared, and all these different applications that we use every day in our everyday life. We don't think twice when we break something. We go to the hospital, we get an X-ray, we what's inside our body without having to open it up, all this stuff. we use the electromagnetic field in many different ways, including, for instance, your cellular phones, using microwave and all this to carry information. All of our society is based, including, creating power, and all this is based on basic understanding of the electromagnetic field, of magnetic fields, and how to use them to power our world. So now we're starting to get new depth in our understanding of gravity. And it's not quite what we thought it was, meaning in terms of Einstein field equation. Not that Einstein field equation or quantum physics is wrong, just that it was a partial view, and that's pretty well accepted in the physics world. Meaning, you ask any honest physicist in the physics community, do we exactly know what gravity is based on the standard models? And he will answer, or she will answer, no. The reason is that Einstein explained that gravity is the curvature of space-time, like a surface of a trampoline bending in the vicinity of a mass. Like if you put a ball on trampoline, it would bend, and another ball would appear to be attracted to it. But Einstein didn't describe what space-time is. So in not actually knowing what space is made of to be able to bend, what is exactly space-time, we don't really know what the root of gravity is. We just know that it works kind of like that. And some of the physics that are being written now, and some of the equations I'm writing, but as well as some of the experiments that are being made in laboratories around the world, are showing a different picture of gravity. That is, that it does bend, like the surface of the water bend in the vicinity of the drain. If you pull the plug in your tub, you can see the surface bending towards the drain, but it's because the molecules of water are spinning and creating that curvature. And so we're starting to be able to see that gravity is actually the result of this energy in space, that's in little quantas of energy called little Planck's oscillators. And just like the molecules of water, where they spin in a coherent matter, where they're co-moving, and there's enough of them co-moving, it creates a gravitational field and mass, which we experience as the material world. So by knowing this, just like when we learn more about the electromagnetic field, we could make devices that use the electromagnetic field to power our civilization. Now, by understanding how we can curve space-time by actually not trying to brute force curve it, but actually spinning the field, we can start to engineer devices that modify gravity in a local region, or modulate gravity so that we can control it and we can lift off, literally.
I have actually a listener question. I don't want to break our chain of conversation, but I just wanted to read this to you. This goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the mainstream. This is from Tom. I believe it's in TuneIn, or I'm not sure where this question came from. It says, does Nassim feel academic science is limiting itself, afraid to consider new theories because of tenures, grants, endowments, money, etc., and being afraid to be heretical and lose their funding?
Absolutely. There's the science community is a very large industry. You got to consider, and it's understandable. You got to consider investments, for instance, at CERN in the excess of $20 billion. I'm sorry, at $12 billion, and huge projects and so on that are ongoing. A certain dogma, a certain way of thinking, a certain way of experiencing the world and thinking about the world, of course, develops and becomes ingrained. And anybody that says anything different, is threatening all of this different projects and so on. of course, it's difficult to accept, and it's normal. It's difficult for people to even consider, and that's the issue. They not only generally have a hard time accepting the idea, but not even there. Just considering the idea is hard. And this, it's nothing different than many things that have happened, many times that it has happened in history, where a new idea came about, and it was very hard for people to accept the new idea and consider it. You know, uh, like it is in some ways, very difficult, though, and it is really sad, because science is not about that. Science is not about dogma. Science is not about thinking you know everything and can't learn anything else from something that's completely outside the box. Science is exactly the contrary about than that. The science is about exploring. Science is about considering any idea with open eyes and taking the good and leaving the bad if it doesn't work out. But at least considering it. And in many cases, that's not even present. In many ways, science has in itself, trying to escape the dogma of religion earlier on, has become its own dogma.
We have another listener question if you want to take it. This is from the Twitter feed, darkmatterdigitalnetwork.com. This is from Graviton Fish. How does Mr. Haramein account for the weakness of gravity compared to the electromagnetic weak and strong forces?
Right, that's a really good question. And that's my point. Actually, that's very much my point in both the Schwarzschild proton paper and in the holographic mass paper, because I demonstrate that actually that's a vast error, that actually gravity is the strongest force, and that's why it's so hard for the physicists to accept. It's only weak and very far away from the event horizon of a black hole, but at the horizon of a black hole, it's extremely strong. It overcomes the electromagnetic field, and I demonstrate in those papers that the so-called strong force that supposedly holds the protons together in the nucleus of an atom against their electrostatic repulsion is actually gravity. It's because the little protons have little event horizons, and they produce a very strong gravitational field. And because the thought that gravity was very weak at the time, when they discovered the protons were kind of squished together in this little nuclei, and the electrostatic force, just like two magnets of the same pole would repel, would demand that these protons go flying apart, and no nuclei of atoms could exist. So when this was discovered, because they thought gravity was too weak, and the idea that the proton may be a little singularity was completely, outside of the thoughts of the time. Of course, black holes hadn't even been discovered in cosmological settings. Of course, people weren't thinking that they would be present in the nuclei of atoms. But that's exactly the point I make in my papers, is that if you consider the little protons as mini black holes, they produce the exact, and I'm not saying approximately, I'm saying the exact force that we measure as the strong force. So I'm saying the strong force that was just added ad hoc, and in physics, it was just thrown in without any explanation where it come from, where the source of the energy to produce such a force was. That force is actually gravity. And, one of the problems with that is that physicists would say, well, if it's gravity, why does it have the same range? The strong force has a range that's exponential. It becomes very weak very fast, where gravity reaches very far, and drops off at the square of the distance. I show in those papers it's because of the spin angular momentum of the little event horizon of the proton producing mass dilation, that the strong force, or that gravity, drops off at the exponential rate near the event horizon of a black hole. So and it all works out. The crazy part about this is that the math doesn't just partly works out, doesn't just approximately works out. It works out exactly, and that cannot be coincidental.
Absolutely. And one thing, I'm actually going to go back to the beginning. You've been involved in physics for 30 years, or I think nearly or over for 30 years. That's 3 decades. It's a long time. And to me, I first heard about you with Thrive. I know you were around before that, but Thrive really put the attention on you for me. And one thing I found really interesting was, correct me if I'm misstating these terms, but you were talking about, I believe it was the torus and the vector equilibrium, how the same force that can be applied to an atom, to a cell, to the planet, and to the galaxy. Can you describe how those forces work? And then later on, can you describe how you got that information?
Well, that's really interesting, because, I, in some ways, just from studying ancient civilization and ancient texts, and people may say, "Oh, what are you talking about? Ancient texts, ancient civilization? Why would a physicist study that?" Well, let me give you an example. Sir Isaac Newton, studied ancient civilization extremely in depth for many, many years, long before he wrote physics, and actually stated in many of his private writings that these ancient texts had very important information about the source of forces, specifically gravity, and that we should study those texts. And so I did a little bit the same. I studied ancient civilization and ancient texts for a very long time, and I studied physics at the same time, and I was finding very specific correlation between the two, between like ancient civilization all around the world talking about this fundamental energy present in the space everywhere, that it has a very specific geometry, that it functions in very specific feedback function. I mean, like if you read these ancient texts, you start to find all kinds of correlation to some of the concepts that are present in physics, like quantum field theory, where the vacuum is full of energy and these virtual particles are popping in and out of existence. And I mean, there's all this correlation that I was finding. And as I was writing physics and I was studying ancient civilization, I came to conclude, heuristically in some ways, that there's a specific geometric pattern that this fundamental energy has, and that this geometric pattern and the dynamics of that pattern, so the geometry and the toroidal dynamic of that pattern was producing the feedback structure that makes up the material world, that makes up the biological world, and that eventually leads to the development of consciousness and all this stuff. And although it was heuristic, I didn't I had some pretty strong support in many of the work I was doing in the equations I was writing, but it actually all came together mostly in this latest paper, because when I actually found the solution for mass and gravity that I'm describing, all of a sudden, completely independently from my other studies, basically the solution is a pixelation of little Planck oscillators. So let me say this in more simple terms. The electromagnetic field permeates everything, and when you look at the space between things, there's a lot of electromagnetic fields. And if you get to the really, really fine level of the electromagnetic field, it gets, you can't find a place where there's no oscillators. Everything is oscillating. All the space around us is oscillating actually very intensely, violently. And people say, well, how come that's happening and I don't know it's there? Well, there's radio waves everywhere. You're listening to the radio right now. There's microwave, there's infrared, there's gamma rays and all this in the space all around you, and you don't know it's there until you have a device to pick it up or something. So it's not completely irrational to think that they may be a field of energy, and we know it's there now. It's called the quantum vacuum fluctuations or zero point energy and so on, and it's permeating all the space all around you. And actually, the stuff that's not the space, the stuff that you call matter, is is this um, is this energy that kind of cohere in chunks that we call matter all around us. And so when you actually work that out, when you work out how these little Planck oscillators of the electromagnetic field, which is like billions of times smaller than an atom, or even than a proton, like billions and billions of times smaller than a proton. Like when you work out the equation that I give for mass, that gives the exact mass of the proton, the exact radius, that gives the exact strong force and its range and all this stuff, the little Plancks, they're little spherical oscillators, and when you tile them for the equation to work, when the equation come out exact, it comes out exact only when they're tiled in a very specific geometry, and that turned out to be the geometry I had found earlier from my earlier studies. It was under my nose all this time. I was looking for the solution to quantum gravity. I had found it, but I didn't know because I hadn't put the two together. And when it came together, it was just remarkable. So actually, this ancient geometric, symbol that you find all around the world, some people call it the flower of life and so on, which is like intersecting in 3D, which is like intersecting spheres, producing this very specific array, tetrahedral array, is actually, truly, really the equation for gravity. It's not just a concept, it's not just a philosophy, it's not just like some religious belief of the time. It really is that.
One thing I truly appreciate is the fact that in ancient civilization, when we were very primitive, how would they even have the notion to have the same patterns in different continents where they had no communication between each other? And at the same time, some of them were, like the pyramids, were aligned to star systems that we couldn't even see. Where do you think that information came from?
Well, if you, outside of taking wild guesses, if you actually study all these ancient civilizations, and just like you said, Dr. J, it's really kind of spooky when you start studying stuff, because you're talking about, you're studying civilization that are across the world from each other, and you're finding the same type of information, the same type of concept about creation and all this. And not only that, you find similar languages. In some cases, you find, of course, you find similar building practices, like, why did the Maya, the Incas, and the Chinese, the Japanese, I mean, like all these people build pyramids. I mean, there's all sorts of shape you could build your buildings with. They all pick those. Now, this is so, like, at one point, if you go in depth in those studies, you start to believe the story they give you, because all these civilizations, none of them say, we came up with this engineering, we came up with all this incredible miracle buildings we built everywhere. None of them say that. All of these civilizations, I mean, literally all of them say, we got this from the sun gods. And the sun gods came in flying boats. In some case, they call it, in the Vedic text, they're much more specific. They call them flying machines. And they say that the sun gods came from the stars. Now, that might be really crazy or startling to somebody to think of, but When you look at the information that's present in these ancient civilizations, when you look at the buildings they built, that in many cases, modern technology could not reproduce, it becomes more and more clear that these people may have been in contact with very advanced civilization that knew what they were talking about.
Exactly. And that's what the notion is. And like you said, when you read what they say, literally, even in the Bible, everybody, Native Americans talk about these sky people that brought them wisdom and everything else. And as you mentioned, the pyramids, they could have built them like igloos round. They could have built them in square shapes, rectangular, like modern homes now. But yet, each civilization had pyramids. And for instance, how would somebody in Egypt or Japan know anything about what the Mayans were building? I thought that was really spectacular. Let me ask you this. To help educate the people in physics and the fundamental forces of the universe, you built from the ground up an online learning platform. Can you tell that? Talk about that a little more?
Yeah, absolutely. So I used to go around the world, like trying to get kind of. There's so much information, and I would try to cram all that in a weekend or in the emissary program in like an 11-day or 10-day period. And I always fell short of like delivering everything I want to do. And as well, people would come out of there with their head full, and they wouldn't know, like a lot of the information just would have, be, not accessible to them anymore within a few days of the seminar. So I wanted to have something that people could like constantly have at their disposition, have all the references, all the information, be able to click on links, go deeper and deeper in the information, or just skim off the surface if they wanted to. So like an online educational platform, we call it the Resonance Academy, was the best way we thought we should do this. And so we actually delivered a course that takes maybe 11 to 12 weeks to complete if you go at an average pace. But you can go at any pace you want. You can go really slow or go really fast if you want to. And like that, people can go at their own pace. They can dig in. They get all the references. They can go and look up the information. They can as well connect with peers all around the world that are taking the course in our forums. And they can, and then every month for 2 hours, I come online and I answer questions directly in this interactive, calls. And people are able to interact with me and ask me questions and go further, and we can all grow together and make comments and all this. And it's really exciting. It's really a wonderful course. And I really recommend it highly if people are interested in this type of information. For young people, students, all the way to like, we've had people in their 80s taking the course and loving it. My son is 10, he took it and he loved it. So it's available for everybody. It's written in language that everybody can understand. And like I said, if you have questions, you can ask them during the month.
And of course, for everybody out there, the website where you could look at the information is academy.resonance.is. And as a matter of fact, if you go to the Dark Matter Digital Network Twitter feed, I am sending the tweet with the link right now. And of course, when this video gets archived, this show on YouTube, you will also see it there. I highly recommend everybody to check it out. So because knowledge is power. A handful of people researching something and not making any breakthroughs because no one else accepts them is not going to help the human civilization as a whole. It really needs to be expanded to where everybody has an understanding of where we need to go and use the tools and knowledge that visionaries like Nassim have gotten. And I think that's one of the most fantastic things, because the implications of what Nassim is saying is very, very serious for all you people out there listening. If this is your first time hearing about him, you definitely should follow up and listen to the last interview I've had with him. He was on Art Bell last month. And of course, we'll be doing much more. He speaks around the world and a whole lot of things. But nonetheless, we will talk more about the Academy when we get back from break for a brief minute. Let me ask you this. How do you think the world will change if we were to understand the connected nature of everything?
I think really dramatically, and it's important for the listener to understand. These equations do predict or demonstrate that actually everything is entangled, and I mean it in the more strict way of physics, especially with the new physics that are being written by some of the best physicists on the planet, demonstrating that entanglement between particles is actually the result of micro wormholes of the Planck distance, that field that I was talking about earlier, connecting everything. It really, these equations are telling us that, like, a proton or the nucleus of an atom is actually not isolated, but it's actually in communication, in contact, in relationship to all the other nuclei of atoms in the universe. That everything is talking to everything, and this is how it actually self-organizes in very, very complex systems like biological systems, and humans have consciousness and all this stuff. And this is a remarkable thing. It will change fundamentally, of course, our technology, because if everything is connected and everything is entangled across the universe, all of a sudden we might be able to transfer information from this side of the universe to the other, including people. But more importantly, it tells us that, like, everything we do, everything we think, everything we are is having an impact on everything else. That, like, we're not isolated, we're not insignificant, little ant over here that doesn't matter to the rest of the universe, but actually that every point in the universe matters. And it gives you a deep sense of reverence for nature, a deep sense of reverence for yourself, and for the miracle that you are, and for the miracle that this universe is. And I think that if people understood that at their more profound level, it could be really a way for us to overcome wars and many of the things we do to our environment, to ourselves, to each other, that is not so positive, because whatever we do to others, we do to ourselves. And these equations actually show that this philosophy is actually absolutely correct.
And just like you said, absolutely, I agree with you. Anybody outside looking in, let's just say another civilization that's orbiting the planet, if they watched World War II, 50 million people dying with nuclear bombs going off, we are a very I don't want to say devious species, but primitive in that sense, and dangerous to any other life form, because, like you said, we kill each other. There's the murder rate in the United States is one of the highest among the world, but there's murders, homicides happen daily, everywhere. And on top of that, like you said, the climate, what we've done to our planet, I think has something to do with this extreme weather that we've been having. Would you agree with that statement?
Absolutely. I think many of the things we do to our planet are very self-destructive. It's like we're cutting the branch that we're sitting on, and in many cases, because we don't understand the interconnectivity between all things, meaning this think that we can do this over here and it doesn't really matter because that this other environment is over there. But the thing is that the ecosystem is connected and is very fragile, and we've done some very fundamental damage to it. Of course, do I think that that's completely, from malicious. It's not. It's just a product of evolution of a fairly low advanced civilization. We have an opportunity now, though, to transcend this lower civilization to a higher civilization with more awareness, more understanding of the fundamental patterns of the universe, and technology that can free us from having to, drill holes in the ground to extract oil to power our devices and so on. Realizing that there is an incredible amount of energy everywhere in space, that we can tap into it, and that we can actually modulate gravity and lift our civilization literally off the surface. All these things are possible. It's just a question of, are we willing to make that transition? Are we going to make it on time? And are people are going to be able to accept that change fast enough so that we can transcend some of the most difficult moments in our evolution right now?
I agree with you again there that awareness is definitely something that is needed. People need to sort of open their eyes and avoid the propaganda of what's kept us from mainstream and from evolving. As Michio Kaku said, we are a type 0 civilization. And just like Nassim said, we are getting ready and we have an opportunity to become a type 1 civilization by evolving. But of course, we have to stop this primitive tribal warfare. When you were talking about the electromagnetic fields, were you referring to things like the Tesla coil where energy is literally freely available, that you don't necessarily need to plug something in and you could just emanates from the air?
Yeah, basically, as we discover that this quantum field of energy called the vacuum fluctuation or 0 point energy in physics, the 0 point energy was actually Otto Stern and Einstein, as we discovered that this field of energy is not just some quantum, virtual thing, but it actually is much more classical in nature. It's much more mechanical. It's actually accessible. It is the source of gravity. As we discover this, then we have the opportunity to understand how to tap into it. There's very straightforward engineering models that will get us there, and certainly some devices, even in the mainstream, are starting to show that, like the EM drive and some of the work that's being done in Finland with superconductive disks that are creating gravitational anomalies and so on, that we can tap into this field, and as a result, and it's extremely rich in energy. Let me just give you an example. A centimeter cube of this energy in the space that's present in the space is more energy than all of the mass of the universe in a centimeter cube of space, like by almost 39 orders of magnitude larger. And so if we extracted 1 billionth of a percent of the energy that's in centimeter cube of space in terms of this vacuum energy, we could run the planet for thousands of years. It's non-trivial. As we learn to tap into this energy, of course, then we can be anywhere in the universe and have almost infinite amount of power, and never have to burn fossil fuel or collide, protons in the nuclear reaction or anything like that, creating all sorts of biohazard material or radioactive material, and or all these issues go away. All of a sudden, you have almost an infinite amount of available energy anywhere you are, not only on Earth but anywhere in the universe. And the idea that there's not enough energy for everybody, and that we have to war to get oil and all these things go away. all the stressors that produce a lot of the nasty things we do to each other go away. So it's really kind of critical that we get there.
Do you subscribe to the theory that we've already reached that level and are able to use free energy, but the mainstream corporations and whoever else is hiding it? Because if they do, if that was released and we wouldn't have to pay for gasoline for a car, or the Department of Water and Power for your electricity, or the gas company, that would be a major economic downturn for them. So do you think that they're hiding it from us and that we are capable already?
Well, all I can say is from direct experience. I've actually measured and witnessed some of these devices firsthand, and and some of them was some 10 to almost 12 years ago, and so people ask, well, why aren't they on the market yet? Most of the inventors have succeeded at doing this are either no longer with us or are under so many threats that they're terrified to do anything with their technology. So yes, I would say the source of this censoring is unclear. I mean, generally, I think it's the military-industrial complex, but it's dramatic, it's terrible, and in some ways, it's understandable. For instance, such a technology coming to the market tomorrow could have devastating effects on the stock market, on the world economy, and so on. So it has to be brought into the world in a very careful and very deliberate and well calculated manner, so that it doesn't disrupt completely our civilization. But it's critical that it comes to the public at large, and it will. Will it get there on time? I hope the authorities will eventually allow it. And that we will be able to transcend this moment in our transition. That's a little bit difficult. It's just like any birth, we're kind of going through the birth canal.
I'm glad you mentioned the military-industrial complex. As you know, Eisenhower, when he left office in '61, warned us. He said, beware of the military-industrial complex. And as you may know, over 5,000 patents have been seized under national security. I remember two videos that I seen. One was a man in Japan, and he had created a car that ran on water, and he invited all the local media, and they filmed it. It was a Nissan, a red Nissan, I recall. I actually still have it on DVD from, it's long gone now. You can't find it elsewhere unless someone else digs it up somewhere. But the point is after he took the people for a drive and showed them how everything worked, the guy disappeared. And then not too long ago, something similar happened here in the United States, where someone created something, a water-powered car, and then sure enough, the car was gone, and we don't know what happened to him. So it's very scary to know that this sort of technology is suppressed when it can have such tremendous implications for us and evolve us to the next level. What do you think it's going to take? I mean, I know you said awareness, and I'm hoping all the truth seekers out there start demanding, from whatever authority is hiding this from us, to get it done, to release it to us. But if they don't release it to us, Nassim, do you think that we, such as you with your theories, can actually overcome that by doing it ourselves?
I think so. I think that it will overcome, it will get there, because it's becoming more and more difficult to control all the different sources. This stuff is popping up everywhere around the world, from inventors everywhere, and as well from mainstream laboratories themselves, like ending up with all of a sudden very large gravitational anomalies when they're spinning superconductive disk, and so on. So there is, I mean, the EM drive, for instance, is is a good example where, although this is not a over Unity device, it it in like viewed from the mainstream, it violates the laws of motion. Viewed from the vacuum fluctuation theory, it doesn't, and that's why actually NASA, when they tested that drive, wrote in their description that it most likely is pushing the microwaves inside the can, is pushing against the fluctuations of the vacuum at the quantum level. But what's happening is that it's popping up everywhere. It's becoming more and more difficult to control, and I think we're going to overcome.
When we spoke before this interview and we were trying to pick a date, you were talking about you came to set up another lab here. And from my impression that you're setting up labs all over the place to conduct experiments with your theories. How many labs do you have going right now?
I'm actually just transferring one to the other. But yeah, I mean, there's labs being built from sister companies parallel to ours, as well in many other places in the world. And there is more and more, like I was saying, there's more and more of these experiments being done because there's more and more people concluding that this kind of technology is possible, and that as I was saying, the quantum vacuum fluctuations is not some virtual thing that you can never interact with, but that actually it's very much classical in nature, and you can build devices based on the way it behaves. And so it really is becoming popular all around the world. It's becoming very much harder to suppress, and I'm hoping that it will be emerging very shortly. I know that many people that have been following this type of work for a long time may be getting impatient and maybe getting discouraged because in my case for 30 years I've been saying it's on its way, but it truly is. And if we consider the few decades that we're going through right now, cosmologically, that's a very short amount of time, and we're actually moving very fast. Like I said, it's on its way, and it has to be done in a very responsible way so that it's the smoothest transition that we can muster.
And I'm glad you said that the information is really spreading much faster than it has been ever. We have things like YouTube. People can post, a device and maybe an experiment, and it could be go viral before an authority has a chance to take it down. Or, of course, we have alternative media networks such as right here, Dark Matter Digital Network, that are providing people the truth. Things that would normally be censored by CNN, Fox, and all the other stuff. But with that being said, Nassim, we are getting ready to take our break. Everybody stay tuned. We'll be right back with so much more with Nassim Haramein.
Foster Gamble, and you are listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
Attention Dark Matter Radio listeners. Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to every minute of the Dark Matter Radio Network by calling 605-562-4444. No smartphone, app or internet is needed. Saves your data plan and no extra cost if you have unlimited minutes. Dial 605-562-4444 to listen to the Dark Matter Radio Network on any phone, anytime, anywhere.
I'm Jack Osborne, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
Two of the coolest guests I have, and of course, Nassim Haramein. You'd be surprised how many of these people are so down to earth and humble and are full of information. But like I said, tonight's guest is a very special one because I put him in the same category as people such as Leonardo da Vinci, Buckminster Fuller, Arthur C. Clarke, and so many others who were able to tap into some sort of universal wisdom that got them to think outside the box and therefore break free of what our society's box has held us in, and that can actually get us to the next step of evolution. Now, before we continue with some questions, Nassim, I wanted to ask you, let's talk about a little bit about your academy. Again, plug people in the academy. And again, for those people who caught on late, we are speaking to, of course, the one and only Nassim Haramein. Talk about the academy again. If you have any books coming out, and I know you have a documentary as well, a film being made, and if you have any tour dates.
Oh yeah. Well, I just finished a tour in Canada. That was wonderful. Across the whole country, from Montreal, Toronto, Calgary, Vancouver Island, and all this. That was wonderful to connect with the folks up there in Canada. And I'm now back in Southern California, where I'm working diligently. So I don't actually have tour dates right now. But there is. The academy where people can connect with me. Again, if people start taking the academy course, then for 2 hours every month, they can ask me questions on phone calls and listen as well to questions and answers from their peers. But the course is so good because it has like media as well, all gathered in the same place. You can imagine the amount of work that I've gathered over the past 30 years is pretty thick, and it's a lot. And to try to like convey this in a seminar over a weekend or over a period of a few days is extremely challenging. And people cannot retain all that information. But what's really cool about the delegate program online is that we constantly update it. We constantly get new stuff in there. People are able to go back to it every time they have a question and then they remember, oh yeah, I read that in the delegate program. They can go back, they can click on the references, they can follow the links, go down the rabbit hole, come up with new ideas, discuss it with their peer on the forums that we have set up. It's broken up in 6 different sections, modules, and each module address various parts of the knowledge from the worldviews that we have today to thinking outside the box or thinking differently to modern physics and the history of modern physics, and then unified physics, the physics we're writing, and then eventually the application of those physics, the ancient civilization part. All this stuff is in there, and it's all there. It's solid. It's sitting there. You can study it as much as you want and ask questions and all this. It's really a remarkable course. And everybody I've talked to that took it were amazed and transformed. It was transformative. For most people that take the course, they come back out of it after doing it and they go, my life is different. I'm transformed. I don't think the same way. They're so grateful that we did this, that we put it online and put all the information. It's so great for me to as well be able to have all the information in one place that people can access it.
And that's why I think everybody out there should check it out. Again, it's academy.resonance.is. Let me ask you this now. Have you worked with NASA at all with your equations? And
No, I've not. I've worked with people that used to work at NASA. You know, in general, NASA has not been so friendly. But they in general institutions have a hard time with the work I've done because it's so outside what is being taught in those institutions. So it's very difficult for them to assimilate it or incorporate it in any of their curriculum. And that's why I get some um, hate mail from certain professors around the world where the students bring my work to them and they don't quite know what to do with it. And in some cases the students undergo very much segregation from their peers and their professors. All sorts of issues come up, so it's kind of sad that it's like that, but it is. And so we're moving slowly but surely, hopefully, towards acceptance.
we actually have another listener question. It's asking, can Mr. Haramein explain the transformative nature in more detail?
Sure. In general, when you see the equations, and there's equations in the delegate program, but it's very light, and we explain extensively what they mean, and how we got to them. But when you see what they mean, how and you study the whole course, because it's kind of all together. It eventually lands in the amazing complexity that you are. For instance, like you're made out of 100 trillion cell. Each cell is made out of 100 trillion atoms, and each one of these atoms is in connection with all the other atoms in the universe. And like this, like people reading the course literally are having experiences of like all kinds of transcendental experiences and so on, just like realizing who they are at a very deep level, and it transforms their life. It's hard after that when you go back out to do things the same way, to think about the world the same way, to think about the universe the same way, to think about your life and what you're doing in your life the same way. Like it just changes the way people experience themselves, experience the universe around them, and experience their relationship to it. And it changes their life at a very profound level. And I get hundreds of letters. When I give talks, people come and see me so many times and say, "You've changed my life from one end to the other," and I'm like so grateful. And this is actually what keeps me going. It's because like it's changing lives out there, even beyond the technological application, which will change the world very fundamentally. What's really important right now is that it's changing the way people experience their universe and themselves.
We actually have a caller here. I'm going to go ahead and bring him in. Area code 951. Welcome to the show. What's your name?
I'm Dan.
Dan. Nice to have
How you
on.
doing, Dr. J?
I'm
Hey,
doing
man,
great.
my tweets are not getting through. But anyway, I have a question for Dr. Haramein. I'm wondering if he's aware of a test that the Soviets did way back in the day when they actually had money for pure science, when they dug a great deep hole that was supposed to go 33 kilometers. They got to about 12 kilometers, and they started noticing things like hydrogen and oxygen actually combining under pressure, and rock acting like plastic. So I'm wondering how the gravity works under pressure.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. I'm not aware directly of that test you're describing there, but Dan, but I'm aware of others where similar tests were done, and yeah, there's all sorts of very interesting anomalies that are not easily explained under the standard model when you go deep into the earth, and including various things like radioactive material becoming inert and so on. And so I like if I was to do a general comment on that question, I would say that the reason is that, uh, as I was saying, gravity is not what we think it is. Gravity is the flow of information in the structure of space. And you could think of these little Planck fluctuation as little bits of information, and basically they're flowing literally like a fluid. It's like a fluid dynamic, and actually that's why Einstein field equations are you know, in certain ways like fluid equations, and and um, and basically, you know, when when you consider the work I've been doing, and this might be really um, startling for some people. Um, like, in order for a planet to have a gravitational field like it does, and for the gravitational field to be the strength it is, and for the magnetic field to be the strength it is at the surface, emanating from a core, actually, I believe that there's actually a small singularity at the center of a planet that produces gravitational field, just like there's a singularity at the center of galaxies that produces the gravitational field, and there's a singularity, according to me, at the center of stars that produce their gravitational fields, and so on. And so when you approach these, when you get closer to these event horizons, when you get closer to these regions, all sorts of changes are occurring in the different phases of matter, that revert more towards a plasma, and have all sorts of nonlinear effects, nonlinear functions of a plasma that are not typically experienced on the surface. So, this is how I generally would answer your question. But of course, much more physics would have to be understood and written along those lines. But I think that those lines of thoughts are the kind of line of thoughts that will explain many of these anomalies, including, for instance, variations in the gravitational field during solar eclipse, which, in general is ignored by the mainstream, although it's measured. Pendulum act differently during solar eclipse and so on. And that's because the flow of the vacuum information network is altered when planetary system lines up and all this. It explains many, many different things, many different anomalies that are typically ignored because they're so out there, they're so difficult to explain in the standard model, that all of a sudden naturally get explained when you get a model that is actually a little more realistic and a little more accurate on how things work.
In 1923, if I'm not mistaken, Einstein won a Nobel Prize for, I believe it was the unified field theory, and you were able to expand on it, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh no, Einstein won a Nobel Prize for his work on the photoelectric effect, and they had to give him a PhD first,
Yeah,
because you got to have one to get a Nobel Prize, and then he got the Nobel Prize, but he didn't get his Nobel Prize on relativity, and he spent the rest of his life looking for a unified field theory. Relativity and quantum physics are at odds from each other. And funny enough, Einstein was kind of involved in the beginning of both, definitely in the beginning of relativity, since he was the author of the papers. But as well, his work on the photoelectric effect was a very strong, component in launching quantum theory, because he basically in that paper described how little packets of energy that he called photons were knocking electrons out of semiconductors and producing an electric field, the photoelectric effect, like in a solar cell, and it supported the views from Max Planck that energy at the quantum level is found in little packets, which is why quantity of energy quantum theory was started from. And Max Planck actually came to those conclusions studying a light bulb. Most people don't realize that a light bulb was the precursor to quantum theory. But basically, Einstein, uh, I mean, literally to the day he died, tried to find a solution where he could reconcile quantum theory with gravity, with relativity. And literally hours before his death, he was still working on these equations. And so um, he never, that we know of, published a unified view. Um, but I think he was really close, and I think that if he had all the mathematical tools we have today and all the data, most importantly, all the data, you got to realize at this time black holes hadn't been found. Singularities were thought to be things that didn't exist. All these things were not. So I think that if Einstein had the data we have today, Einstein would have solved it, because the equations I found are very simple and they're very straightforward. And he was very close to it. And he even made the statement, and that's really important. Even made the statement that when the equation would be found to unify the two, it most likely would be a simple geometric equation, which is what I found, and it would be written in straight up algebra. And that's exactly what I found. I think Einstein was absolutely on it. I think it was really close. Maybe if he would have had another 10 or 15 years, he would have done it.
And thankfully, it's been so many decades since he passed away that you were able to come across this and expand on it and get this equation, because, like I said earlier, and we've said last hour, this is the next step in our evolution, so we can actually move up as a civilization from what Michio Kaku said, from a 0 to a type 1. You mentioned the Planck. I want to ask you, your theory uses the Planck unit as a fundamental pixel of life. What is a Planck, and how does it relate to us?
Okay, well, that's what Max Planck found, is that, he was basically hired to improve on the light bulb, and by a consortium of light bulb producers, and they wanted him to improve on the time of a light bulb and all this. And so he started to study, of course, the radiation and thermodynamics of the filament of a light bulb. And this had to do with a very specific study that's called black body radiation. That is how much heat a body, how much radiation would come off a body in which any incident light is absorbed. And when he studied that and he solved these equations for that using the classical theory of the time, the answer was wrong. It would predict that the light bulb should emanate infinite amount of ultraviolet. And in laboratories we weren't measuring infinite amount of ultraviolet. So it was dubbed the ultraviolet catastrophe at the time. And so Planck, while working on these equations, because he was just trying to do something practical to figure out a better light bulb, he just started to put a fudge factor in the equation that would make it come out right to the experiment, so that the ultraviolet would come out the right value of the experiment. And this fudge factor that he kept on adding, he wasn't proud of it. He wasn't happy with it. When he published it, he thought it was probably wrong. He thought, there's probably a better solution, because it was counterintuitive. It basically said that when something heats up, it doesn't smoothly heats up. It heats up in very specific packets of energy, that the universe is quantized into these little quantities. And this quantity that he kept on having to add to make it work eventually became the Planck's constant. And and Bohr found that actually that little quantity was accurate to describe how the electron of an atom orbit around the nuclei and how it jumps from one orbital to the other in these very specific integers that have to do with the Planck's constant. So it was confirmed by Bohr, and then Einstein wrote, the photoelectric effect and called the little packets of energy of the electromagnetic field the little photons, and so on. And so it, it took off from there, and so if these little packets of energy, they're little actual angular momentum, they're little spinners, they're little quantum of actions. They're called. It's h over 2 pi, so it's a little like it's like the spin of a little circle that closes on itself, and so you shouldn't think of this little oscillator as like an up and down thing on an oscillator on a oscilloscope, but as a little spinner, right? A little vortex spinning, if you'd like, and this of course has a very specific wavelength. It has a very specific size, and so he was able to calculate that size based on all the equations he wrote, and it's the only natural unit that we have, meaning that it's not it's the only unit that's not arbitrary. It's based on gravity and the electromagnetic field and all this stuff. So it actually is the only natural unit we have. And I took that and I started to think that maybe this was the fundamental pixel that pixelates the structure of space. And that space is not empty, but it's actually these little pixels. And I wasn't the first one to think that way. A very famous physicist called Paul Dirac, describe a sea of energy that way. Quantum field theory eventually, from the Dirac equation, proved that this field of energy is there. And so, but what happened is when I actually looked at these little Planck units of energy and start to calculate the relationship of the little Plancks on the surface of a black hole relative to the Plancks inside the black hole, as if it was like a pressure of the information inside trying to get through the surface on the outside, I got the exact mass of the black hole. I got the exact same solution as Einstein, but in a completely different way, in a quantum way. And then I applied it to the proton, and I got the right answer again, and the right force for the strong force, and so on. So it basically started to unfold that way, and that's how I ended up using this fundamental natural unit to describe gravity, which is a unit of quantum. It's a quantum unit that I'm using to describe gravity at the classical level, meaning at the large level and at the quantum level.
And now, let me ask you this. You talked about the 0-point energy earlier. Can you expand on that for those listeners who don't quite understand how it works or what the theory really is?
Okay, so this is exactly what I was describing now. When quantum theory was developed and this little quanta of energy was described, eventually was found in quantum field theory that that this quanta of energy, like, it wasn't good enough to just quantize the thermal emission of an object, but you had to quantize the electromagnetic field as a whole, like all the photons and so on. And when they did that, they realized that space, the fabric of space itself, is quantized. The vacuum is quantized. And basically, Otto Stern and Einstein calculated that even at 0 Kelvin, at absolute zero, this quantum field of energy in the space would still be oscillating. there's no way of stopping it from oscillating. Even at 0 Kelvin, it wouldn't stop oscillating. And that's how it got the name 0 point energy. And it's that same energy I was talking about earlier that's permeating everything. And that Einstein and a very, very incredible physicist called Wheeler, John Archibald Wheeler, that worked with Einstein and so on, that these guys thought, man, this vacuum energy may be the source of reality. Like, there was a lot of interest into it, but it was, in some cases, it was so overwhelming. It was so hard for the mainstream to like even listen to some people like Einstein and Wheeler and others, because it was so out there to think that space may be full of an energy that makes up matter, because it basically reverses your view of reality. Instead of matter making space, meaning of matter defining the space, it's space that makes matter. And that's why Einstein said things like, um, you know, uh, physical objects are not in space, but they're an extension of space. And in that matter, empty space loses its meaning. I mean, this is literally Einstein talking about the space producing the material world. But it's been a long coming for the general scientific population to accept those ideas.
With regards to the universe, or as some researchers and academics call it, the multiverse, they say that there's as many as 11 dimensions. And of course, I only know the four, the length, height, width, and the fourth being time, which some can argue is being man-made. Do you subscribe to us having multiple universes, multiple dimensions?
Right. So I think like there is the confusion, and people think the people can confuse multiple universes with multiple dimensions, and they're not necessarily related. And that's where a lot of confusion happened between people that are more layman and spiritual people talking about multiple dimensions, but not thinking in terms of multiple Cartesian planes as a mathematician or a physicist would think of. So, string theory is written, or superstring is written in 11 dimensions, and so on. I absolutely subscribe to multiverses, but not in the typical way that multiverses are thought of. I don't think of them as parallel. I think of them as embedded within each other, meaning that you can think of a galaxy as a mini universe, and that galaxy is in a larger one that we call our universe, which is in a larger one that we call, a multiverse, and so on. I think of it that way, in scale to each other, not necessarily parallel to each other. But the difference is that when a mathematician or a physicist says 11 dimension, they're just talking about vectors in space. They're just talking about Cartesian space. They're talking mathematically. They're not necessarily talking about different universes per se. So it gets really confusing. And string theory, I just got to mention this. String theory has been there for a few decades. Thousands and thousands of scientists, physicists have worked on it. Billions of dollars have been poured into exploring strings and so on. Not one prediction that could be measured in laboratory has ever come out of that theory. It's extremely complex. It predicts really what I would call goofy things, like, that there's some 10 to the 480 some compactifications possibility. It doesn't give straight up answers, basically, to our reality, and nothing that we can measure in laboratory. And so, as a unified field theory, it's not very practical. It's extremely complex, and you know that when something is extremely complex, it's probably not accurate. And on the alternative, I wrote a theory of unification. It unifies absolutely perfectly well gravity at the quantum level. It demonstrates that gravity is actually the result of quantum oscillators, and and it does a very good job in a very simple way. And within a few months of being published, it predicted extremely accurately the radius of the nuclei of an atom, where the mainstream is off by 4%. So it's very powerful.
Can you, the string theory, when was that first talked about? Because obviously I've been hearing more and more about this now, just like I've been hearing about the multiverses and the holographic Earth and all that. When was the first time you heard about it?
About some 20 years ago, I was involved with string theorists and mathematicians. As early, some 20 years ago, I started to study it, but to hear about it and study it. But it wasn't until 1996, 1997, where I was in contact with string theorists at the time, which were really innovators and working. They were getting the same kind of treatment and segregation
As you.
I get as
Yeah.
I get. And at the time. And there was some very heated conversations in various conferences in universities in the in many places where I was participating with string theorists that were really going at it and innovating. And I thought it was very wonderful to see. And they had some there's some foundations to string theory that are very accurate, very interesting, very positive. It's just that I think it went down a path of complexity and certain of abstract mathematics that don't necessarily apply to the real world, and I think that's where it kind of lost the plot, and that's why most scientists today are very much disenchanted with string theory, and when a few years ago there was thousands and thousands of students and undergrads and so on that were writing theses on string theory. There's less and less interest now. People are looking for the next thing, because they're looking for a solution that's simple, that's practical, and that you can do measurements in laboratory and even build technology of.
Another thing that going back to earlier on in the show and begin closer to the beginning of hour one, when I talked about your paper, Quantum Gravity and the Holographic Mass. Can you describe the holographic mass? What do you mean by that?
Well, because you see, I used a terminology that's already in the mainstream. It's called the holographic principle. And what happened is that it was found that if earlier on, it was thought that the quantum world, because it's so teeny, it's so small, it has to do with atoms and subatomic particles and all this, that it didn't have much of an influence at the cosmological size scale, like black holes and stars and galaxies and all this didn't really care what was going on at the quantum level because it's so much a different scale, right? But it was found, from the work, funny enough, from people that were working on some string theories, that actually if you pixelate the surface of a black hole with little plonks, and you tile it, a little bit like the interference pattern of a hologram, and so that each plonk is a little bit of information, you can resolve problems in physics that have to do with the information paradox issue, and as well it gives the correct answer for the heat or the energy of the black hole, the thermal energy of a black hole. So all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, the the quantum world is actually involved at the cosmological level, and this solution was called the holographic solution or the holographic principle, because of this tiling looking like a hologram. And this is why I don't know if you saw that, Dr. J, in like popular magazines, all of a sudden covers of magazine appeared saying, do we live in a holographic universe? Is our reality the projection of a holographic membrane of a universal black hole? All these things start to like come up that like maybe we live in a hologram that's a projection of the information that's present at the quantum level on the surface of black holes and universes and so on. And I took that solution and I said, well, what about the information that's inside the volume and the relationship of the information that's on the surface to the information that's on the inside? And when I solved these equations, all of a sudden the result I got was the exact mass of the black hole. And that's why I called it the holographic mass solution. And it didn't just give me the correct answer for the mass of the black hole, just like Einstein gives you the correct mass of a black hole. In my case, I was doing it with quantum objects. So it was a new solution to Einstein gravity, but with quantum objects. When I applied it to the proton, to the nucleus of an atom, it got the right solution or the right answer for the mass of the little proton. So imagine you've got a crazy theory of holographic information that gives you the exact correct answer for a black hole that's the size, that's huge, like the center of a galaxy or a quasar or something. And then you can take that same equation and apply it to something that's teeny weeny teeny in the middle of an atom, and you get the right answer for that thing as well. And that's why it unifies the large and the small. It unifies quantum theory with relativistic equations.
Black holes, as you mentioned, obviously stellar black holes are humongous in the center of galaxies. They suck up planets. Light can't escape from them. But as you know, here on Earth, we're trying to create black holes on a very minuscule level, with the particle colliders such as CERN. Do you know if there's any dangers of us doing that?
Yeah, I mean, there's controversy there because there's certain solutions to the mathematics that's used for the energy levels of the accelerator at CERN that predicts that black holes could be produced in such a way that they would go out of control and basically suck up the Earth. But I think these solutions make incorrect assumptions about what a black hole is. And I think we don't quite understand what a black hole is at all. And because I think that every atom is a mini black hole. So they're already there. They're already produced. We don't need to produce them. We just need to understand how they work and start working with them. And just like I predicted that the center of all galaxies were black holes, and I was correct, I assure you that these predictions about the nuclear atom is correct as well, and the math shows that very, very specifically. And so I think that there's an inherent danger with the accelerator that doesn't have to do with producing a black hole, that just has to do with colliding black holes, because we're basically colliding little protons. We don't think of it as black holes, but we're colliding these little protons and basically shearing little chunks of them. We call those subatomic particles, but these particles don't live very long. They live for very, very, very short amount of times because they're unstable. So I don't think they're fundamental at all. I think that the proton is fundamental because the proton has never been seen to decay. It's extremely stable, so on. But so you see how, never mind. And this is something that I don't hear any physicists talk about, and it's pretty flagrant to me, is that if you build a large accelerator like this, and you put massive amount of gigapower in there to create a huge magnetic field to accelerate particles near the speed of light, which is what they're doing at the accelerator in Geneva. Well, when you do that, like the environmental impact is completely being ignored. Meaning, like, what does it do to the ionosphere? What does it do to the magnetic field of the Earth? Like, all of a sudden, there's a huge, intense magnetic field that's being lit up in one side of the Earth. What does it do to the core of the Earth? I mean, those things are not being considered at all. I'm much more worried about that than, them making a little black hole that's going to swallow the Earth. I'm not worried about that.
Yeah, I would have to agree that we definitely have to focus our attention on what is a danger as opposed to things that aren't, such as something as minuscule as that. But there are a lot of conspiracies going around that on September 23rd, there's going to be this big test at CERN, and people think that it'll suck the Earth up. But let me ask you this. What is your take on consciousness and meditation? Because a lot of people believe, especially now, more people have evolved to believe that that's where you can actually access information from other sources. Even Foster Gamble talked about him meditating and asking the universe how it works. That's sort of how he went around his journey. Do you have any comments on consciousness? Do you meditate?
Oh yes, I started meditating at the age of 11. I've been meditating most of my life. I think it's a very important thing, and I don't think it's so esoteric. I think that as my equations show, every point contains the information of all other points. They're all connected. So if you actually enter the network, you can have access to information, that you and that might be what we call imagination. You see, that's the thing. Every large changes or every big step in our evolution came because somebody got an idea, or somebody, had a gut feeling. Like, Einstein figured out relativity because he was like sitting in a bus going around thinking, wow, about this and about that, and he had like gut feeling and all this. This is how you come up. It comes from internally. Innovations come from inside, and so if you want to connect, if you want to like innovate, if you want to go beyond what's known, you have to go within. And and meditation is a tool to do that. Whichever way you do it, like any way of contemplating, yoga, whatever, like to help yourself instead of looking outside, which is fairly limited. If we're actually made out of these billions and billions and trillions of little black holes or little singularities that are worm linked to everything else, this is where the information lies, within us. And it just happens that most of the masters that have walked the earth have told us that. And I think that it's not like some esoteric concept. It's actually the way things work.
I agree, and that's why I think so many people are hopping on the consciousness bandwagon and understanding it. As a matter of fact, Edgar Mitchell had an aha moment or an enlightenment coming back from the moon, and I think 43 years ago is when he started the foundation noetic.org, which explores consciousness, and he's actually trying to apply it mathematically. I don't know how. I don't know those details. I just know through the last interview, which everyone will get to hear soon, as it's released as an exclusive YouTube interview, what he says about it. But I do think it's a very important topic. Consciousness is something everyone has to pay attention to. Let me ask you this. What are you working on now, and what can we expect from you in the future?
Well, on that subject, I actually just presented a paper in Lisbon with a colleague, Dr. Val Baker, a cosmologist, and with a biologist, molecular biologist, William Brown, on consciousness. So that's something I'm working on, describing consciousness as not being produced by the brain, not the epiphenomena of the brain, but actually the brain being like an antenna that's tapping into this field of information, and which and mathematically demonstrating how the antenna works. And so I do work on that kind of stuff. Of course, I am continuing in exploring the physics I've started 30 years ago, and the next step is the application of the holographic mass solution to cosmogenesis, which means we're re-looking at the Big Bang theory with this new solution of holographic mass, and describing the Big Bang completely differently, showing that actually it's more like cell replication universes that's occurring, like a little proton escaping a universe into a larger one, all of a sudden experience a drop in pressure, tremendous, which makes it inflate to the size of our universe. And so that universes are forming new universes on their surface. And funny enough, as we're writing this paper in cosmology, a paper, we're able to cite Einstein 2013, because in 2013 a paper was found that had been lost from Einstein, and it was published, and it was Einstein exploring a new model, a different model, an alternative model to the Big Bang, in which matter creation was occurring inside the universe out of the vacuum, literally describing something very similar to what I'm talking about, and these little and describing that the surface of these universes must be losing matter as well, and so that there's a continuous creation and emission of matter. And so Einstein was coming to similar conclusion, unbeknown to us, like almost 100 years ago, and or less, maybe like 70, 75 years ago. And so I'm working on that as well. And of course, I'm working on laboratory experiments to, to apply these physics to practical means for technology, for health, and so on. Because we're baiting in this information, we're baiting in this field that makes up our existence, unbeknown to us. And as we realize that, we can make technologies that could even, enhance our capacity, enhance our life, extend our life dramatically, modulate gravitational field, produce energy. I mean, the applications are incredible.
We have about 5 minutes left, and I'm going to ask you this question. Then, of course, I want to get you a final statement from everybody. What advice can you give to the listeners to either push the authorities to release the technology, or for each of us individually to participate in reaching the next level of civilization by getting to the level of creating gravity or controlling it?
I think that what's important is for the listeners to get involved, like support projects like the Resonance Project and the Resonance Academy. Go and take the course. Take the time to examining the facts before you dismiss things. Go and do your own research. get involved in movement like the Thrive movement and so on. Like, basically get involved with yourself as well. Like, take the time every day to turn your senses inward and connect with your source, connect with your universe within you, and don't limit yourself to your day-to-day horizontal world. Go vertical. I like to say to people, go vertical. And it's hard. We get caught up. I mean, you should have seen the day I had today. It was just hectic as heck. And it was epic, and it's easy to get caught up in all of that. And and it's okay, and it's normal, and you might get angry, or you might have a hard day or whatever. But when you go home, sit in your bed, recenter, connect with your source, and participate in the collective. If you do, you're making a huge difference. Don't underestimate the difference you make when you connect to the collective, when you connect to the morphogenetic field, and push the boundaries. Write your local authorities, write the academic world. Tell them to look at these new views. Talk to your friends, your family, to everybody you can think of about this kind of work, and get people involved, and have discussion groups at night, and on weekends, and just go for it. Believe in yourself, believe in the universe, and believe that you're part of an incredible wheel works of nature, that you're a miracle. Don't underestimate the miracle you are, and believe in yourself. It's critical.
You're right. We have to believe in ourselves and in humanity that we will be able to achieve the next level. And you're right. Right authorities. And one thing I've always said is, if the government is in control and hiding things, we'll vote them out. Start, a new session with the new people to lead the country. But again, there's just so much we all can do. I hope everybody does check out academy.resonance.com and enroll in Nassim's course. You will definitely, from the feedback I've received, there's been a lot of people who, like Nassim said, have had their lives changed. Nassim, in about 2 minutes or less, I want to give you the final word of what you'd like to say to the audience.
Yeah. First of all, it's .is. I just wanted to correct that so people go to the website. And it is, or go to resonance.is. Resonance is. That's why we picked the IS extension there. But what I would like to say to people is, there's a lot of hope. I see a lot of people that have lost hope. And, and it can get like that a little bit if you get in too deep into conspiracy theories, and and all this stuff, and you start to realize what actually is going on the planet, how it's being controlled, and all this. It can get really discouraging. I've seen people go through really hard times, and and it's just not like that. There is all that stuff, but what people have to concentrate is the possibility that's emerging from it. It's an evolution, and we need to make those steps, this evolution. We are making it. And, participate. Just get out there, get positive, go hard, and, explore yourself, explore the universe around you. Don't segregate your thoughts, just go with what makes sense to you and what resonates, and explore it. Like, stay open-minded. Things that may seem like improbable or impossible to you may not be the way they appear. And so keep an open mind, keep at it, take the time to connect with yourself and with the universe every day. And until next time, may the vacuum be with you all.
Well said. Those words and spoken by Nassim Haramein. A very special thanks to you, Nassim. I also have to thank the station owner, Keith Rowland, for working tirelessly to keep this going. And of course, stay tuned for Art Bell. You'll be able to hear about the EM Drive. And of course, the most important people I need to thank are you, the listeners. It is you guys that disclosure is in your hands. Don't forget to check out the YouTube channel, Dr. J Radio Live, DRJ Radio Live. That's where interviews are posted with a lot of good footage as eye candy, and you'll see older interviews from a couple years ago from some people who have passed away, as well as these current ones, and even Nassim's last interview. And just recently, Stan Friedman was posted up there again. Footage from a listener, an experiencer, was also posted, and another interview with an experiencer was posted. So much more to come. Follow the website, drjradiolive.com. That's the only name you need to remember. And with that being said, this is Dr. J signing off.